Hey, good Friday morning, December 13th, a little after 7 a.m. Eastern Time. Michael Clark with BAM Weather. We're going to talk about a huge cold blast coming for Christmas from the central to the eastern U.S. with some snow chances as well. And then we are also going to talk about the pattern getting into January that I think features a lot of winter on the table and perhaps some intense cold and stormy patterns as well into January. So make sure tune in today, share it with a friend. If you have not, make sure you have registered and you are following the YouTube channel. Just go to @BAMWeather. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel so you're getting all of our latest updates. All right, so let's get into this. I want to talk about kind of where we've been to date. This is the upper level pattern here, the first 10 days of the month. And what we've seen a lot of is a lot of Pacific Northwest ridging, and a little bit of a connection here in the ridging into the higher heights, the Arctic Circle, and into the very far north Pacific. We've seen this Aleutian low charge up, and this vortex in the northern Pacific be rather prevalent. But it's also, what it's doing is it's sending a lot of areas of low pressure, a lot of storm systems into the Aleutian Islands, into the Bering Sea, and the chain of the islands, and that's going to be, I believe, a precursor or an early signal to a very stormy pattern to emerge following that. But what's interesting in this pattern is there's a lot more of this pattern to come yet. You know, a lot of folks have been saying that, you know, where's the cold? It hasn't been that cold, and all these other things. And when you look at the month-to-date departures here, the first 12 days of the month, I mean, it's just been really cold. It's one of the colder starts to December we've had in quite some time. And we're going to add to that. Now, we're going to take a little bit away from it in a short-term mild period coming up, but another big Arctic blast coming in here right around the 20th of the month, and it's going to last another 6 or 7 days. So this is probably going to be this is probably the look of the December temperature departure. And I tell you what, this has been fun because this is what we thought would happen way back in late October. All right, way back into even early November when we talked about a pattern flip coming. Okay, now one thing we've seen, no doubt about it, is we've seen a big lack of precipitation. It's been a pretty dry pattern here. All right, especially here across the Ohio Valley, the central U.S., down into the desert Southwest. In fact, just a really large portion of the country has been really, really very dry. I mean, it just really, there hasn't been any moisture through here. The storm track has been through here and up the coast, and we're kind of looking for something to change that. And I think over the next 10 days we're going to, right? I think over the next 10 days you're gonna pull in. Well, I know you're gonna get some moisture in here, but the unfortunate part for you snow lovers out there is there's not going to be a lot of snow in this particular round of moisture. It's going to be more rain as the Arctic air is pulling back during this time. Okay, so that's just the way that's going to be for now. All right, but let's look at the forecast pattern here. This is the European ensemble. What I talked about, very simply put, is that the pattern coming is a lot more of the same of what it's been. Here's the forecast 5 to 10 day pattern. There's the pattern right now. Okay, it's a lot of the same in regards to what's happening, and what you're going to see is that's really going to deliver the Arctic air leading into Christmas. The East is really going to have a nice pattern, and it's not out of the question. It's not out of the question that at some point in here that there could be a decent signal for a nice storm somewhere around the 21st or so of the month of December. There's obviously a nice low pressure signal here. I think something track-wise can do this around this time period. Okay, obviously I'm really giving you a rough idea here. If something like this were able to happen, you would be looking at a winter storm and possibly snow of some sort in here somewhere. All right, it's difficult to say where. If I had to be honest, I would favor the eastern part of this more than I would the western part of it. But regardless, around the 21st or 23rd or so, there's a signal here for a storm. There's no question about it. The intense, poleward look here of this Pacific Northwest blocking pattern is really going to drive the depths of this trough here, which means it's going to dig Okay, just something to keep in mind. There's an Arctic connection. There is Arctic air there. There's going to be a storm. Now, what happens is, and you know what? I had something I wanted to share with you guys to start the video. I need to slide that in here so you guys can see. This is what I believe is going to happen, though. Okay, it's warmer until the 19th. So the next, 5-6 days, it's going to be warm. We've got that big cold blast leading into Christmas with a storm in there somewhere. There's a storm in there. I believe this. And then we have a warmer risk showing up. So we're going to kind of dissect this. There'll be a pullback after Christmas to some warmer conditions. And then after the new year, I think really about the 3rd of January, especially later, the 10th beyond, there should be a lot of winter that we're dealing with. And you can kind of see this. You can see in the pattern right here a lot of the same. But what happens is we're going to start to pull off the Pacific blocking somewhat as the MJO is going to move. The MJO is going to move into 6. And as it does so, we are going to see a moderation period. By day 15, temperatures from normal, they're not, it's not an absolute blowtorch in the east, but it is warm for most folks by day 15 as we are losing some of that Pacific blocking. There's the American ensemble version of that. There's those not coming in, but there's those two versions of that. The Canadian's much warmer. There is going to be a pullback is the point. Now, I mentioned the precipitation pattern. It's going to be where a lot of folks have not gotten rain the next 5 days. You're going to get rain, no question about it. Going to need the rain, take the rain. May even get some thunderstorms in the Ohio Valley. How about that? Not as active in the 5 to 10, but here's the GEFS, here's the Canadian, here's the EPS. And what I want to say is I do think, with that being said, that again, I think there's a storm in here in this window, and I think that the model is trying to see something in here that indicates normal precipitation to hints of above normal precipitation. There's a signal there for a storm of some sort. Is the story there. In the 10 to 15, it continues to stay a little dry. So we're going to get some mid-month precipitation, but we're not going to get a bunch, a continued prolonged precipitation pattern. A lot of this is hinged and driven on the MJO right now, okay? Because we're going to get into phase 6, and you can kind of see what I'm talking about here with a couple of things. All right, you can see obviously the warm risk. That's pretty plain as day. We're going to engulf the area with warmth, as I just talked to you about, the 26th through the 3rd or so. But as we do that, you can see where the wet risk is. Okay. Now, again, prior to this, cold for Christmas, possibly a storm. Keep that in mind. Maybe a clipper or two for some snow around Christmas as well. Keep in mind the clippers around the Great Lakes and up into the north and east. Phase 7 comes in. Now, how do we know that? Okay, great. I'm glad you asked. So we're looking at the propagation of upward motion, velocity potential anomalies across the Pacific Ocean. All right, you see the greens and the blues moving across. We're moving the MJO. All right, and that's really going to start moving end of December into early January. So here's your phase 7. All right, still some precip in there. This is a snowier look, by the way. Snowier look, little southeast gradient. Phase 8 gets very cold, not as wet because of obviously the cold air. But some precip in the central and the southern U.S., favoring more at least potential for snow type patterns. The CFS is doing the same thing. You can see the latest run has phase 7 the first week of January, which also indicates the potential for some disruptions, some warming in the stratosphere. Okay. And I will say on the stratospheric polar vortex and the sudden stratospheric warmings also, these are not linear responses to when those types of things happen. So if just because there's a signal for warming doesn't mean necessarily anything, especially in the short term, I more so look at the orientation and the placement of the vortex. Where is the core of the coldest air? Is it available to tap into? That's what I look for. Yes, the sudden stratospheric warming events have multiple effects down the road, 30, 45 days, more so in the subseasonal category of 30 days or less or so. I'm looking at the orientation and the availability of the polar vortex and where it's at. It's very important. A lot of people miss this. A lot of people don't understand where the cold is where it can come, where if it's potential to tap it is my point. So I want to talk to you about that. All right, so this is the polar vortex. I think the best match in the vortex orientation of where the cold is, how it's placed, the elongation as it's stretched is 2013-14. We've thought that for several months. This is the last half of December placement of the 10 millibar stratospheric polar vortex. Where's it at? This is kind of the idea. Here it is, and then here's this, and here's a very similar look. Okay, now you're already getting some warming showing up over here, which is this is going to matter, but you can kind of see the similar orientation of the vortex, and there's plenty of vortex availability in Canada, in North America, for storms to tap into and bring the cold air down. Hence why it's going to get cold. It's going to get cold before Christmas because the vortex is there. The Hudson Bay vortex is there. There's cold available. Look at the first 15 days of January. Look at the Pacific side and look at the Atlantic side, especially the Atlantic side. Miss the core of that. Look at the elongation, the stretching of the vortex. All right, this vortex we didn't see a wind reversal in 14. We saw a stretched, weaker vortex and an active storm track that tapped into this and pulled that cold down. We had a ton of snow in the Midwest in 14, and we had intense cold. This is where the term polar vortex really got its buzz in 2014 when social media started taking off, by the way. It was 2014. Polar vortex was the buzzword. That's where it's all stemmed from, by the way. It's just so y'all know, the polar vortex is nothing new. It's been around since the beginning of time, but now everybody just hears more about it thanks to social media. But look at the forecast pattern. Look at the forecast pattern of the vortex in 14 versus to the right. I mean, you can't draw that up any better, especially on the Atlantic side. You just can't draw it up any better. It's there, right? Now look at this. All right, look at the 50 millibar vortex. That's been more of our that's lower than 10 is the highest level. You're going 30, 50. As the millibars increase, the height decreases. So 1,000 millibars is pretty much close to the surface, right? That's just how that works. With a decrease in height, you're increasing the millibar scale there, if you will, just to try and simplify that for you. You're increasing the millibar scale there. So anyways, long story short, here's your fifth. This is your Hudson Bay vortex. And what this did, by the way, in 14 is it froze over the Hudson Bay, iced it over. We had a lot of feedback. I read a study on this years ago, and now I don't remember enough about it to really speak too much about it, but there was a lot of cryofeedback, which is and I forget the exact wording even. I would have to look at this. You could Google this and learn about this. I'm sure there's papers on it. But the iced over Hudson Bay really had left the vortex kind of holding on, right? It just kind of continued to produce its own cold for a long time. Long story made short, back to layman's terms. What does that mean? Well, very similar look here in the forecast versus that overall look, which means the vortex is in a favorable position to be tapped into. That's all it means. I mean, you take this thing out all the way out into mid-January, it is stretched and it is nasty. We got strong Atlantic nudging going into the vortex. It goes back and forth. The Pacific does it as well. But the vortex overall really keeps its orientation, the cold air over Canada and North America, and available for tap. That's the point. It's available to tap into. That's what I want to make sure you understand. Here's the European weeklies, all right? And European weeklies, by the way, in week 2 show this moderation period. They show the pullback. They show the we're missing the blocking. But look what happens by week 3, all right? This makes a return. It's positioned a little further west this time, and you can see the heights extending all the way up into the Arctic Circle, okay? And your vortex is starting to subside. The reason this vortex is subsiding is we've got a westerly wind burst coming through that's forecast to happen, a zonal westerly wind through the equatorial Pacific. Long story short, it's supported. and the MJO is moving. All right, so the Pacific blocking is going to make a comeback. Week 4, we've got a strong Alaskan ridge and the return of a negative EPO. We've got our trough here, our Hudson Bay vortex, and we're starting to see hints of some warmer southeast heights, higher southeast heights. By week 6, this is a classic positive TNH pattern, vortex readily available. And this pattern here really screaming the availability of a lot of winter, especially with the poleward protruding ridge here into the vortex. And you've got to keep in mind the heat fluxes you're going to get in up to the North Atlantic with the active storm track into the stratosphere. You're going to pump up the heights of thermal expansion as that storm track gets active, all the things, and you're going to continue to work on both sides of the vortex, but not splitting it, which I don't really want to split. I like the elongation and the orientation to keep it available to tap into. Here's the other thing. Look at the North Pacific. Look at these storms, these huge lows. Look how stormy it is. It's endless. Okay, this is January signals. January signals galore for storms. That's another thing I like. So what does this mean? What does it all mean, right? Well, here's what I think it means right now for getting into week 3. We're going to talk about basically ending the December and opening January. I think that there's the period you're seeing now, coming into the next 5-6 days, you're going to see a moderation here. Okay. Similar to the end of the forecast in the 15 to 20 day period, you're probably going to see that same moderation. You're probably going to see, as that MJO6 kicks in, you're going to see kind of a conus-wide retreat of the Arctic air from the 26th to the 3rd of January. It's the thought process. And then what you're going to see is the return of this pattern that will start to bleed cold in like this. And that's going to be to open January, basically. Let's just call it the 1st. You're going to see a return to this, okay? And start to see the cold come back. And then what starts to happen is as you get into that 16 to 30 day period, later into the period, you're going to see the cold really start to come back like this. The warmth's going to be back out to the west a little bit, I believe, in a fashion probably like that. And then you're going to have an area of probably rather intense cold somewhere like this, especially the deeper you get into January. And you're probably going to even have an episode here somewhere in this area where you're going to get a massive blast of Arctic air into mid, first or second week of January. Very hard to know it for certain right now. Nonetheless, we're not done with winter. We're not. I don't believe that we are. The background state supports that it comes back. The vortex is in a very favorable state for it to come back. And the MJO is going to move. I just think it all makes sense. There's a couple of warm periods in there, again, as I mentioned. Wherever that went. There's graphics everywhere. I had it in there, I thought, for you. There it is. Sorry. Geez, just flashed with everything. But this is the idea. Okay. Take a screenshot if you want. Last but not least, the extended forecast of snow. These are for pure mere entertainment. But nonetheless, a look like this is just not off the table based on everything we've talked about. A lot of snow, a lot of storm systems to offer up snow. That's the European. Here's the GFS. This only goes out to 35 days. There's a lot of snow in here possibly. So something to keep in mind, going forward is the pattern does favor that. And let's watch for a storm next week. It's going to get very cold next week. And then we're going to watch January because I'm intrigued. And I think January has a lot of potential on the table. So share this with a friend. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Talk to you guys again soon.